what's worst case scenario, what's your exposure. So we're really pleased, and we've had a long-term relationship with Barney for a number of years, and he's done a good job because he knows the players. He's also one of the E&O partners with Texas Realtors and works with them. Are you still involved with that, Barney?
I am. I have a call next week.
Yeah. And so, that shows the level at which he operates. So the concept, and he's going to show in a minute, the things that we're to learn today and go through it, but he and I will kind of jointly go back and forth. He'll basically go through the PowerPoint, and occasionally he'll come upon something that I want to make a comment on, and so we'll go a little back and forth. But I appreciate him doing this. This is very important for us to have a sense of what's going on out there, some of the trends, some of the things that we need to do. We do some things. There's some things in this that we'll talk about that are unique to our office, and each brokerage has their own policies about how they do certain things, and really some of those like recommendations and endorsements and things like that, which, as you know, we don't do. So please welcome Barney Schwartz, and Barney, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I want to start off before I even introduce myself to say these classes work because the offices that have the classes and have the dedication of risk management have fewer claims. And that may not sound like a huge ordeal to you, but it really helps the team leader in recruiting agents when their E&O fees are lower than other real estate offices. And one of the ways that they stay lower is by having fewer claims. And, the last few years, this office has done a really, really good job. And Bob's pushed me to be on schedule to make sure we give these classes on a regular basis. So hopefully you'll find it to be of interest. Try to keep it as light as we possibly can. So my name is Barney Schwartz. I'm a licensed risk manager. I run our E&O program as well as personal insurance for Assured Partners in DFW. And as Bob mentioned, one of the Texas Realtors risk management partners. There's 5 of us nationwide, 2 of us local to DFW. What you will hopefully get out of this class today is the most common types of claims and ways to avoid being sued. Steps to take when selling your own property. Yes, there are additional steps. Dual agent transactions and dangers. Dealing with the crazy client. Now, if all of you tell me you never deal with a crazy client, we'll skip over that portion of the class.
Yeah, what are the chances?
Normally get laughs. I guess you guys are dealing with crazy all day long. And then how to protect your email from getting hacked, because that is a major issue within the realtor community. So what we need to talk about first is who and what is covered. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. For all of you that are on this call, you qualify as an independent contractor when you place Bob's name or Texas Star Path as the broker on your contracts. That's what triggers you as an independent contractor. Now, Bob, what was the name of that listing service that we were talking about?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, and I go blank on it. But yeah, it was a concept that's kind of important to talk about.
Yeah, so, gosh, I don't know. I just drew a blank as well. I guess Bob and I are the 2 old folks that lost our memory. But anyway, if you get hired, let's say you contract with a listing service, and they're going to go and pay you $50 to go handle a listing on behalf of another agent. You are not considered a contractor under this policy because you're contracting directly with that listing service, and the office is not a party to that contract. So if you're doing anything of that nature, you need to talk to Bob and figure out what your dangers are when you're doing so. The other thing all E&O policies are going to do is they're going to identify what occupations. And why do they do that? Because they don't want to offer E&O to a lawyer, to anything of that nature when they're doing a real estate E&O policy. Your policy covers residential, commercial, and property management. Of course, the office does not allow that, correct, Bob?
Yeah, our office doesn't have any of our agents as property managers. We've got one who has a broker's license, and that's Jim Ellis, and he does property management under his license, under his broker's license, and has a separate E&O for that. So within our brokerage, we don't, none of our salespeople are allowed to do property management. So we stay away from that.
And then the other thing I'll mention under this one particular topic is if any of you form an LLC and you need to show proof of E&O insurance, as long as you're transacting all of your business through the KW Plano office, Bob and I are able to provide you with the adequate proof of E&O so you do not need to go purchase another policy. Any questions so far? I think probably the best way is to send it through the chat function and hopefully I'll see it, or if somebody wants to monitor the chat and just stop me if something pops up. So I got asked, we had a situation where an office was selling this commercial building, very, very nice Jiffy Lube franchise. And what happened is as the transaction progressed, the agent was giving information about the Jiffy Lube franchise itself, the profit and loss, the franchise agreement, the advertising program, the training, things of that nature. Well, what happened is the sale of the building itself went just fine, but it was the sale of the business that became problematic. So the agent ended up giving advice about, you know, all those things that I just mentioned, and in comes an E&O claim, not for the sale of the building, but more on the sale of the actual business itself. And what ended up happening is the E&O company denied coverage because they said you were acting as a business broker, not as a commercial realtor. For those of you that do commercial, make sure you differentiate when you're acting as a realtor, sale of commercial building, and when you're acting selling a business. Doesn't mean if you sell a shopping center or a commercial building that you can't give rent rolls, you can't give, you know, a list of the expenses. That's all part of a real estate transaction. But in this case, the realtor was venturing off and selling an actual business. So let's talk about fiduciary duty. You've heard it many, many times, but let's be clear what that means. That means all of you are experts when it comes to real estate, and hopefully all of you know more about real estate than I do. Hopefully I know more about insurance than any of you do. It means you know more than the general public. It means you must make recommendations when appropriate. Now, the most important things when it comes to a fiduciary as to what it does not mean. It does not mean you make decisions for your clients, and it does not mean you offer advice on real estate. Any questions, comments? Bob, you have anything you want to interject there?
No, I think it's good. In the area of recommendations, remember our policy on that. We've got a vendor statement policy form that lets people know, you know, we've had good experience with these people. We don't recommend them. We don't endorse them. We don't do that because then whatever that vendor does, we're responsible for if we don't make sure the client does their own research and chooses their own inspector and own home warranty and own, you know, lender and so forth. So we're very sensitive about the recommendation area, you know, and at the same time, I'm pretty comfortable that our clients have a right to benefit from your sets of experiences. It's just how you balance that. You don't want them to walk away thinking you've just recommended so strongly and endorsed so strongly an inspector. So if anything goes wrong, that becomes our inspector. And then we've got that challenge there. So we're pretty good with that. So yeah, that's all I'd say on the recommendation. Of course, you know, don't step outside of the authority of your license. Advice outside of real estate. You don't have any opinions about the condition of a roof or a foundation or anything of that nature. If you have something that concerns you, you'll recommend additional inspections, but you won't ever say, wow, man, you sure have foundation problems here. Not your job, not your expertise, not your authority under your license. So be very careful of that. And it's hard because we know how you are in your helpful mode. We all get very helpful, and you want to be careful when you're being very helpful. Okay, moving on.
Bob, you want to know what the worst part is about doing a class on Zoom?
What?
Is I used to have step contests with people with this great Apple Watch, and we would do a
Oh,
class, and I would literally get in 2,000 steps during the
okay.
class. Now I'm not getting in a single step because I'm just sitting here. I may move my feet and may falsely give me a couple of steps, but that's about
Yeah.
it. All
So
right,
you got a lot of work to do after class. Go get some stepping in.
there you go. All right, let's talk about what we do when an E&O claim, TREC complaint, or subpoena request surfaces. I like to talk about the subpoena request because that's a situation where you do everything right. The buyer loves you. The buyer is going to go and sue the seller because the seller didn't disclose everything on their house. Sounds reasonable so far, right? But guess what the buyer's attorney wants? Even though they love you and you did everything you said you would, they want information from your file. They want copies of emails, copies of contracts. And you're like, whoa, I don't want to get involved in this. What do I do? Well, what you don't do is comply with that subpoena request. You notify Bob, and what we'll do is we'll report it to the E&O company, and they will actually hire a lawyer to review the subpoena request. So you only give what's absolutely necessary. Similar thing if a TREC complaint pops up. Don't go and answer it on your own. The E&O company will provide counsel to help you answer the complaint so that it doesn't manifest itself into a further claim. These things are all done without deductible. Now, when the E&O claim comes in, that's a whole nother story. You don't want to jump and hire your own lawyer. You can hire an attorney anytime you want, but the insurance company is going to hire a law firm that has expertise in real estate defense. And if you hire your own lawyer, then there's going to be two lawyers on the case, and it may be completely unnecessary. Time is of the essence here. You don't want to go and delay reporting an E&O claim. It can become really problematic if this happens close to the renewal date, because Bob is completing an application that says, I have no knowledge of any potential E&O claims. Well, guess what? If you guys have knowledge, Bob has knowledge. And that's why these things have to be reported promptly. So let's talk real quick about the claims process. I was trying to make this a little bigger, not disappear. So typically what happens is you're going to get a demand letter. Then you're going to have to get together all of your information. Now here comes the tricky part. If I were to turn around and say, Steve Frank, give me a copy of all of your emails and voicemails and text messages from a file you closed last week, you would probably say, no problem, Barney, I've got this right here at my fingertips. But what typically happens is these claims come in 6 to 9 months after you've actually closed the transaction. So I'm not asking about the stuff you closed last week. I'm asking you about the stuff you closed in February. And between now and February, you've probably gotten in a lot of voicemails, a lot of emails, a lot of text messages, and may not have that information so readily available. From there, you go into discovery, depositions, and mediation, and settle. So, document, document, document. That's what insurance companies always tell us. And I found this on one of the insurance companies' web pages that I'd like to read out. No real estate professional ever expects to get sued. And if you're lucky, you won't find yourself sitting across the aisle from an angry homeowner. But the unexpected does happen, so it's important to be prepared. And the key to being prepared is to document everything. Real important, about half the claims that we get in result in no payout to the other party. What does that mean? That means you guys are getting sued for nonsense about half the time because the other party's not getting any money. But guess who's getting the money? The lawyers. So you still have to pay your deductible. You still have to go through the hassle, even though the other party's not getting any money. And then a huge percentage of the claims are settled before trial because the company looks at the cost of defending versus throwing some money at it to get out of the claim. Any questions so far? You guys really can ask a question. You know, the class is only about an hour and 20 minutes, so it won't be like it delays you past 3 o'clock. All right, let's talk about the most common types of claims. Bar none, it's misrepresentation or non-disclosure, and it typically relates to the quality or issues with the structure, and most commonly as it relates to the seller's disclosure. Now, in a little bit, you're going to hear from Ashley from Seller Shield that's going to give you some information about an alternative that you can use to you know, get yourself out of the seller's disclosure business. The second most common types of claims, and we talked about it a little bit already, is undertaking additional responsibilities beyond your expertise. And we'll talk a little bit about a couple of E&O claims that talk specifically about that. So again, the primary duty to your client: provide relevant information, but not making decisions and interpretations. Client is making informed pro-con decisions based on the information you are providing, and then document the information you are providing. And remember, the client is always the decision maker. Any questions so far? All right, so 5 steps to enhance client relations while reducing risk. This sounds like an impossibility, right? So how can you help your client relations yet still avoid getting sued? When in doubt, disclose. You know, I can't ask you or tell you how many times I've been asked, well, do I need to tell this? Do I need to disclose this? The answer is absolutely yes if you know about it. Know your expertise, or like what I like to call, stay in your lane. Don't deviate outside your normal lane of traffic. Recognize your role within the transaction. If you have a foreign or international client that has broken English language, find a translator. And then again, understand your duty as a fiduciary. Any questions, Bob? Anything you want to throw in there?
No, and well, actually I do. We do have the challenge in understanding, you know, when we disclose things, we're disclosing, we're held responsible, but remember, your limitation is you're not disclosing your opinion about the condition of the property. But if you have any information about the property, and typically you would get that from the seller, then you need to make sure the seller understands it has to be disclosed. If they won't disclose it, you'll disclose it, and it's work through that. So disclosure is at a very high level for the agents. Just don't step over the line. And we kind of already talked about that, and start making statements beyond your level of expertise as you work through it. But because, you know, we are the fiduciary, we are the ones that are there for our clients. And I know later on the slide, we'll talk about probably the most important risk, you know, mitigation thing. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. And that's the concept of being likable. So we'll see that in a little bit. But that's it. Go.
Yeah, but Bob, how can people like you and I teach people how to be liked? I mean,
you know, that is a problem when we talk about the concept of being likable. In fact, it's such an important concept that we're going to have a class on how to be likable. And our problem is, who do we pick to teach the class? Well, certainly not me. Yeah, so we got to find somebody that everybody would universally agree, yeah, we see that. Everybody likes that person. So, yeah, you know, maybe we'll have to have a survey or a poll or something. I don't know.
All right, so let's give an example of non-disclosure. Oh, what are we doing here? Here we go. So I got a call. This is actually from another Keller Williams office. And it says, we would like to put these air fresheners, and it's not that particular brand or that variety. And I'm like, what's the purpose of this air freshener? And they said, we want to make the house smell like cinnamon rolls. And I'm like, okay, that sounds nice, but are you to disclose something? And they said, yeah, you know, the house kind of smells like cat pee, in here you don't, but we want it to smell like cinnamon rolls. And I'm like, well, that's a horrible thing to do, because one, you're misrepresenting an issue with the house. You know, people can have a sense of smell. I mean, my wife can smell cat pee in Houston, whereas I can't smell it when it's right in front of me. So if you're intentionally baking something to avoid a smell in the house, that's a problem. If you're wanting to bake cookies just so the house smells like cookies instead of like house, that's probably not a problem. So again, it comes down to the purpose of putting in the air freshener, baking the cinnamon rolls, baking the cookies. Let's talk about what is considered part of the house. And this is a part of the class where we kind of jump around a little bit. And typically this is going to relate more to the higher value homes. So we had a situation where a house had what looked like built-in bookshelves. Debbie, very similar to your background. I see those beautiful bookshelves behind you. But the bookshelves were actually built to fit the wall exactly. So they weren't actually built-in bookshelves, but the people had the bookshelves cut so they fit that particular space. So imagine the problems when the buyer moves into the home and the bookshelves are gone. Well, the bookshelves weren't built in technically, but everybody thought they were built in. So when it comes to bookshelves, make sure that they truly are built in. Window treatments, you know, we had an interesting claim where the seller threw in the window treatments and the matching bedspread. So the buyer goes and moves into the house and the window treatments are there and the bedspread is there neatly folded on the bed, dry clean. And the buyer turns around and said, "Where's the sheets?" So the buyer wanted the used sheets from the seller as well. So again, very important to make sure everybody knows what's included. Mirrors can be kind of tricky because, you know, if it's permanently installed, it's part of the house. But define permanently installed, and can somebody have a mirror in a bathroom that's on a hook that looks like it's permanently installed? Now, if, you know, it's an issue in my house and I took away the $8 IKEA mirror and somebody sues me for it, great, I'll give them another IKEA mirror. But in a lot of the high net worth houses, these mirrors can really be very, very expensive. Same thing with fireplaces, right? You have the metal screen that prevents the sparks from coming out. And maybe you have a beautiful gold plated protection in front of that the buyer is assuming is part of the house. Again, get everybody on the same page. When it comes to personal property, if it's something like somebody just throwing in a refrigerator or a washer and dryer, sure, go ahead and use the non-real estate property addendum. But if it's something where they're throwing in a significant amount of personal property, I recommend using a separate bill of sale for that personal property between the buyer and seller and not making it part of the real estate contract. Because if a problem happens and something shows up, it doesn't affect your contract and it's simply something between buyer and seller. And they absolutely, even for your non-real estate addendum, make sure they know you're selling or that the seller is selling the items as is with no warranty. Because you'd be amazed how much of a problem that can become. Any questions? All right, let's talk real quickly about backup contracts. And Bob, this may be more your cup of tea than mine. But what I typically say is the seller has no right to get out of the primary position. The buyer has a few rights to get out of it. And if you want to get out of the primary position representing the seller, you better go see Bob.
Okay, so let's talk. We talked a little bit about backup contracts in our advanced contracts class yesterday. And we do need to remember, and one of them is the statement that we have here. If you represent the seller and your seller is in a primary contract and then your seller accepts another one, and then you have the backup contract, the seller does not have to disclose to the primary buyer that they've got a backup contract. They totally are in control. That's confidential. They're totally in control of whether they do that or don't do that. It depends on whether they want to do it to improve their negotiating position when the first buyer is trying to negotiate all kinds of repairs, and the seller may disclose it, or the seller may not disclose it and hope this first buyer goes away because they'll like the backup even better. So a backup contract is important. And one of the things is we talked about, make sure earnest money option fee, use our procedure for splitting that up, because the buyer needs to pay something in an option fee right up front in the backup contract in order to have that right of termination, because they're probably still looking at other properties and they've got this backup just in case they can't find anything else, but then they kind of work through that. But when you negotiate, when you've got the buyer or even the seller and you're negotiating that backup, you need to treat very seriously, because your first contract can literally go away overnight and your seller is now stuck with that backup. Occasionally, we see listing agents and sellers not treat this backup seriously and say, well, we got this first great contract and it's going to close. So, this other one's just kind of just in case. And then they end up accepting a backup that's really not great, not as good as they would have done on the primary. So be aware of that, because these first contracts can just go away overnight, literally. And we're, frankly, in the new environment we're in with low inventory and aggressive buyers, we're seeing buyers really push much harder to get into contracts. And then once you're in a contract, they really take a serious look at what they've got. We're seeing more transactions fall apart than we have in quite some time. So you want to be very careful. I mean, we've got one right now, a good agent, and we represent the seller, and we just got through with our third buyer who just terminated on that same property. We can imagine the sellers feeling like they're kind of shell-shocked and jinxed, but that's happening, and we got to be able to work through that.
And we've seen a couple of, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, we've seen a couple of E&O claims where the listing agent, gets out of the primary position inappropriately, and now they're getting sued because the deal is no longer in place.
Yeah. So you have to be very careful how that happens, be sure.
All right, so we're going to talk about some transactions that I equate to driving on ice. And just because you drive on ice doesn't mean you're going to have an accident, right? But what it probably means is you're going to take some precautions, and you may not text while you're driving in ice. And I know all of you are saying, I never text when I drive, so no big deal. Talk on the phone, stuff like that. So let's talk about some of these transactions. The first is agent-owned properties. An agent-owned property is defined as a property that you own 25% or more of, whether it's in your name or an LLC. We're going to talk a little bit about joint representation and intermediary transactions. And then I'm going to give a couple of claim scenarios for an out-of-town buyer and a situation where a realtor had a funny feeling about an actual buyer. So let's talk about agent-owned properties and the requirements that the E&O company has in order for coverage to exist. You must have a home inspection. Now think about this for a second. You're selling your own property. You want the buyer to get the inspection. You don't need to have a copy of it. You just need to know the name of the inspector and the date that it was inspected. You need to purchase a home warranty or the buyer purchase. The reason why is it gets rid of the little tiny claims. You need to have a seller's disclosure, even though you may have rented that property out for the last 10 years. You need to use TREC or Texas Realtor approved forms, and you need to somewhere disclose that you're the realtor and seller of the property, and there is no coverage on the policy if the home is owned for less than 1 year. So it's not covering agent-owned properties on flipped houses. Here's an example of a form. It's not really joint representation, but this is a situation where you represent only you have the listing and you're hosting an open house. And now the buyer walks in and the buyer says, yeah, I want to put an offer on the house. You ask who the realtor is. They say, we don't have one. And they ask you if you would transact the paperwork on their behalf. So whether it's acting that way or acting as an intermediary where you're not representing either party, the important thing there is to make sure all parties to the transaction know exactly what your role is within the transaction. Bob, what do you have to add there? Because I know this is one of
So this is a phrase that in Texas, we're talking about the intermediary relationship. If the broker is representing the seller and the buyer in the same transaction, that can only happen in Texas in an intermediary relationship. And the only choice that the parties have and the broker has is the broker either appoints one agent to represent the seller, another agent to represent the buyer, or the broker does not appoint and one agent is in the middle representing both sides, totally neutral. Our policy is that if you have a situation in which you want to represent both sides, seller and buyer, in an intermediary relationship without appointments, you need to talk to me or you need to talk to Mike. We need to have a conversation because it's generally not a good idea. I had a call just this morning from an agent who said, you know, talk to me about maybe being able to represent both sides here. Turns out that the buyer was a family member and actually the seller was a family member and the buyer probably needed representation. Well, if you're representing a family member, you cannot also represent the other side. That's a huge conflict of interest. You'll never convince the judge in a lawsuit that you negotiated against the interests of your brother or your mother or your whoever. So you can't do that. And the key question that we always ask when we're looking at intermediary and maybe representing both sides is we ask the question, let's say you've got the listing and the buyer comes along without an agent and yet they want to buy your listing. So the question is that buyer capable of representing themselves? And if they are, keep them as a customer. If they're not, you, the listing agent, cannot help them because you already represent the seller. If you take the buyer also on as a client, you're totally neutral in the middle, no advice or opinion to anyone. And you should know intermediate relationships, particularly those without appointments, are a huge target for plaintiff attorneys and they're a real challenge. TREC does not like them. TREC says if anything happens in intermediate relationship, the first thing we believe is you did not have informed consent from the two sides. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this problem. So when you have that situation happen, we don't have an absolute prohibition for you doing intermediary without appointments. What we have is a requirement. You got to talk to management. And we got to need to have a conversation because it's really something that's just looking for trouble. So we have to be very careful with it.
Great, thanks, Bob. All right, now we're going to go through a string of claim scenarios because claim scenarios are really the best way to drive home a point. This particular case, it's a claim I call at the house. And what happened is the seller had already moved out of state, so the house is vacant. The buyer comes in, puts a contract on the house, gets the home warranty, the home inspection. The inspector comes back with a moderate list, but nothing that would be a real deal breaker. So you call up your seller and you say, okay, what do you want to do? The seller's like, I've already moved to Seattle and started my job with Microsoft. So, take care of it for me. So no problem. You call the handy person that everyone in the office uses. You go out to the house, you let the handy person in, you stay there while they're doing the repair work because it's only going to take a couple hours. And handy person finishes it. You lock up the door and you send documents to the to the buyer. And you say the items have been fixed. So there's a string of problems here. One, the realtor chose the handy person to use. Again, not a great practice, but not the end of the world by itself. The handy person was uninsured. So again, liability is going to fall back. But the biggest problem the realtor made, according to the case, was that they made the comment that the work had been fixed. You never know whether anything's been fixed. And so you don't want to use the word fixed when describing repairs to a house. You also don't want to say nothing's wrong. You want to give copies of receipts and say, here's copies of receipts of the work that's been done. Because the problem, the realtor was there the whole entire time and was deemed, quote, the supervisor of the work while the work was being completed. So again, the big thing there is to get rid of the term fixed. Any questions on this? So let's talk about playing messenger, okay? The realtor took responsibility to have the home repaired. The details of the repair were not provided, I'm sorry. The realtors state the items were fixed and the contractor was uninsured. Any questions on this before we go to the next one? All right, so is there anybody that's taking or that's sitting here on the class that if a bug popped up in front of them, they would immediately get out of their chair without regard for how fascinating Bob and I were? The largest claim that Travelers ever had to do with snakes. And depending on the people, you know, if there's a cockroach in my house, the question isn't whether or not my wife is going to sleep at a hotel, but for how many nights she's going to sleep at a hotel. So different people react differently to bugs, to snakes, to everything like that. But do not ever make the comment that things can be treated. Because God forbid those bugs reappear, they're going to come back and say, I thought they could be treated. What happened? So in this particular case, there were snakes in the basement of the house, not a Texas house. Realtor goes in and says, oh, don't worry about the snakes. We'll call up an exterminator. They'll be handled. They'll be treated, blah, 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 blah. So the exterminator comes out, treats the snakes. Snakes go away. They close on the property. 30 days later, here come back the snakes because they're deep in the ground. And so the exterminator comes back out, treats the snakes. 30, 60 days later, here come the snakes again. Well, in order to get rid of the snakes, they finally had to demo the house, dig up the dirt, and rebuild the house. The big thing here, again, is not to make the statement of bugs, snakes, rodents, anything like that can be treated because people freak out over those things. And at the end of the day, juries are the ones that determine awards. And if there's somebody on the jury that freaks out from bugs or snakes, they're going to understand 100% with the buyer. Any questions on bugs, snakes, maggots, rodents, anything of that nature?
So what kind of language are you supposed to use when you're having a treatment done?
Something to the extent of, you know, an exterminator, call an exterminator and see if they can treat it or something of that nature. But instead of being conclusive, because now you're basically being an exterminator by saying it can be treated and they will go away.
So Jim brings up a good point here, and the concept is that when there's anything that indicates conducive conditions, or you see snakes or you see bugs or whatever, all you're going to do is make some statement to encourage the client, buyer or seller, to, you know, do the treatment, to do whatever. And the only information you're going to provide after treatment is done is you're going to provide the information on that treatment. And as Barney points out, you'll never say, okay, you know, a pest company's been out here, problem solved, we're fixed, we're good, no problem. Where we see that a lot in Texas deals with wood destroying insects and dealing with active infestation and particularly conducive conditions. So what you've got to do is make sure the information you provide is objective and is sourced. In other words, when you say something, you don't say, okay, termites have been, you know, taken care of, it's treated, it's done, because now you're personally responsible for that condition. You say, you know, we've had the pest control come out, we had ABC, wood destroying insect company come out, and here's their information, and here's what they've got, and here it is. And client, if, you know, you need to do whatever you need to do to follow up and make sure that what you need to have happen has happened. But all you're doing is providing that information for somebody else to make decisions. So be very careful about that. So good question. Thank you, Jim.
All right, so let's talk about written evidence versus statements. When you get a copy of a home inspection, and every once in a while, and by the way, if you see me looking to this way, and it looks like I'm sideways, I promise you I'm not checking emails and stuff like that while I teach this class, although I am ADD enough to probably do that. It's because all of your pictures are over here and the PowerPoint's over here. So you get a copy of a home inspection report. Now, all of a sudden, guess what? If the deal falls through, your seller's disclosure is probably not accurate any longer. But what you don't want is for the the seller or yourself to modify the seller's disclosure. You want to give a copy of the home inspection to any prospective buyers that may be purchasing that house. The same thing with repairs. We talked about that. What about foundation or engineer reports? If you were to call 5 foundation companies out to look at a house, how many foundation reports or how many differing reports will you have? It'll be 5, right? That's what everybody has always said in the class. So what you don't want to do, and we've seen this before, where a conservative foundation company comes out, they do the measurements, and they're like, oh, Jeannie, your foundation's fine, don't worry about it. Now the buyer moves in, there's foundation issues, and a more aggressive foundation company comes out and says, what the heck are you talking about? Your foundation needs 20 piers. Well, guess what? Now they found out that there was a pre-inspection done with a foundation company. So I always recommend if a foundation company comes in, even if they say nothing's wrong, you turn around and you give that information to the potential buyer as part of the seller's disclosure or attached to it. Any questions on this?
Okay, Barney, did you say if we get a report back that says there is something wrong, does the seller need to update his seller's disclosure for future?
I would not. I would just attach a copy of the home inspection report and make notes, say, see home inspection report. Because if the seller goes and they're modifying it, now all of a sudden they're interpreting the home inspection report. And neither you nor the seller want to be put into that position. And we're going to talk a little bit about Seller Shield in a few minutes. That will give you a good out in situations like that.
Okay, so let me add just a little bit to this, if I may. Everybody who's been in my classes knows how much we've evolved in how we handle seller disclosure. And Seller Shield is a great service that helps our sellers out, and I think is something we certainly need to be making use of. The challenge with a seller's disclosure, if you represent the seller and the seller ends up with information from an inspection report, a buyer who went away or whatever, so they've got to do it. What the seller is required to do is make sure their seller's disclosure notice reflects new information they have on defects. Seller has a right to dispute it, has a right to do their own, but they've got to make sure that they don't just leave things lying. And Barney's right, the best way to probably do that is to, include the inspection report with it. Now, Texas Realtors has a form that they've created that's an update to the seller's disclosure notice. It's a one-page form because the property code does not require a seller to update the seller's disclosure notice, as Barney pointed out, but they need to make sure their information is current and is correct for that next buyer. So by using that form, the seller could, particularly for just a couple of items, can list it, or can have on that form and say, see attached inspection report, which is a best business practice of getting that information to the next buyer. By the way, because of this challenge, it's one of the reasons that for the most part, seller gets to always decide, but for the most part, if I represent the seller, I don't want to see the buyer's inspection report. I don't want to be bound by the opinion of somebody else's inspector. And we can't prevent it from happening, but most of the time we don't want that. So just how that goes.
By the way, if you get the inspection report emailed to you, no one's going to believe the fact that you never opened it up. If it gets emailed to you, you received it.
Exactly. You got it. And so does your client.
So when we talk about forwarding critical information, it's important to have a central location for those documents. And the one that's really the most challenging for a lot of people is the voicemail. So you get a voicemail from a client that's pretty critical, and maybe it's a client that you don't necessarily trust. Well, for those of you that are on an iPhone, your voicemail looks something similar to this. Well, this little box right here with the arrow sticking up, I'm circling it right now. If you click on that, then this box over here pops up. And if you hit mail and send an email to yourself, then what it's going to do is actually attach this recorded voicemail message into the email. So now you'll have the voicemail into your email, which you can turn around and attach into dot-loop, right, Bob?
Yes. You then have the documentation. Same thing when you get a text message. I encourage you to convert that text message to email, so you've got that better documentation in case you need to do anything. Yeah, I agree.
All right, so now we're going to talk about another claim scenario called coming up roses, and this is important to talk about because more and more HOAs are popping up, more and more townhomes, more and more condominiums. So in this particular case, the buyer was passionate about roses, absolutely insistent that she was going to build a little mini greenhouse. So the realtor gets a copy of the HOA documents, reads through them, and tells the buyer, no problem, there's nothing in here precluding you from building your little mini greenhouse. Well, most of you know that that's a big mistake because you do not go into HOA documents and make interpretations. What you want to do is give a copy of the HOA docs to the buyer with the number of the HOA and say, you know what, you better call them to find out whether or not this is going to be okay. In addition, something that's become a little bit of a problem of late is you have investors buying townhomes and condos. Well, here's the problem. That HOA may limit the number of or percentage of homes for rental. So if you have an investor that's buying a house within an HOA and you sense that they're going to either do an Airbnb, that can be restricted, or it's something within a townhome community where they may say, hey, only 20% can be rentals. Again, just refer them to the HOA if it's going to be an investment property. And that just pretty much describes.
For interpretation, make sure the buyer confirms.
Just provide a copy. All right.
Let me just add a little thing onto that, please. On the question of things that someone can do that an HOA may limit, and and there's an investor who wants to use as rent property. The important point on here is the buyer needs to talk to the HOA, not you. They need to do the research. They need to find out they can do what they want, and it's not the seller's responsibility to determine whether or not the buyer can do this. When the buyer puts that information in the contract in paragraph 6D, giving the buyer rights of objection, it's the buyer's responsibility to do it, not the agent. Because if you get information from the HOA and it may be wrong, we're liable. So you need to be very careful and encourage your buyer to go through their due diligence to find out if they can do what they want to do with the property. And this is especially true with condos and HOAs and deal with investment properties.
Let's talk a little bit about storms, because we never have storms, especially in August, right? Until 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
A little bit of a shocker. I think there may have even been a mini tornado or funnel cloud that came pretty close to touching down. Let's talk about a scenario, though, where somebody wants to close on a house right after a storm. So let's say there was significant hail damage, and you have a buyer that turns around and says, I don't care about the roof. I want to close. The movers have already packed up the stuff in my old house. I've already closed. I need to move into this house. So you turn around and say, okay, now all of a sudden the buyer decides, okay, I need to make a hail claim. So let's talk about how this is going to play out. The house already closed. Now, if you would, I know there aren't a ton of you on video, but please raise your hand if a realtor calls you back right away on a consistent basis. Exactly. I didn't see any hands go up. Now, that's when you're trying to sell something to them or buy something from them. Now, imagine a scenario where the transaction's already closed, right? And so now you need to call that listing agent to say, hey, will you tell your seller to file a hail claim? Let's say everybody's great. The realtor returns your call. The seller agrees to file the hail claim. Now you got this thing called a deductible. And if it's a $500,000 house, you've either got a $5,000 or a $10,000 deductible. Now, all of a sudden, let's say the seller agrees to pay the deductible, or you were astute enough to maybe put it in escrow before the house closed. Now you got that thing called recoverable depreciation, and that's the check you get once all the repairs have been completed. Well, guess what? Not all the companies will go and pay that if the house has been sold. Long and short of it is, this is going to be an absolute nightmare for you to have to deal with. And unequivocally, the recommendation is to delay closing. You just can't go and close. Now, there may be situations where you have a couple of weeks before closing. So now you can get a roof up there, but you want to expedite the process. The most important thing if you're trying to expedite the speed is to make sure the adjuster from the insurance company and the roofer who's going to do the work meet out there at the same time. Because if they're not out there at the same time, what's going to happen is the adjuster is going to go and write an estimate, miss a couple of items, it's going to go to a supplement unit, and they're not going to give a darn that you're getting ready to close a house. So again, adjuster and roofer there at the same time. Talked about that. So typically the way you define a roof replacement is they measure a 10 by 10 square on the roof and they count how many hits are within that 10 by 10 square. Most companies, if there's 8 hits, they're going to deem it a roof, but a new roof. Some of the companies we have though will go up to 15. All right, any questions on storms?
Let me add a little bit to this. Part of what Barney was saying in delaying a closing or whatever, it's very important that your client, whichever side, buyer or seller, that they have the information to make a decision. For example, you don't want your buyer to ever feel like what you've done is you've encouraged them to go ahead and close and we'll get this worked out and seller file an insurance claim and everything be okay later, or let's escrow some money or whatever, because your buyer feels like you pushed them into a closing that perhaps they should have made. While nobody wants to delay closing, especially when people get ready to move in, whatever, when these things happen, and they happen the night before closing, they happen the morning of closing, you've got to make sure that everybody understands they're in control on the decision making about what to do, whether to delay or move forward. And this is where they sometimes have to get the good legal advice from a good attorney on what their rights are in delaying. And it's where you need to be pretty comfortable that you're familiar with paragraphs in the contract, like paragraph 14 or a casualty loss paragraph, and you understand what can and cannot be done there as you work through it. So the big thing here is be patient, let your client be patient, let them make decisions, and don't have them feel like you're the one that made the decision and you pushed them into a closing. Because when you do that, anything that happens, anything that's going on, it's going to become your fault. And if it's your fault, it's our fault. So please be careful with that and be patient. Thank you.
Text message dangers. Anybody ever send a text message to the wrong person and extremely embarrassed by what got sent? So
today?
Oh, I'll give you a great example in just a second of something I did. If no one else wants to give an example.
Hey, Barry, this Barney, excuse me, this is Brian.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you regarding roofs.
Yes.
And it's not if the roof is totaled, but I did have a client explain to me that for homeowners insurance, that it's good to have a roof evaluation prior to the purchase so that they can evaluate the roof from a homeowner's standpoint because of depreciation. Is that something that you've heard or can comment on?
Yeah, so none of the insurance companies that we're aware of, and we do a lot of homeowner insurance as a independent broker, so we've got about a dozen different companies that we write through. None of them go out there and pre-inspect, except for maybe the high net worth companies like a Chubb or an AIG. So the best thing I always recommend is to have the buyer select a roofer along with a home inspector, because a roofer will go out and look at the roof for free. You want to make sure it's not one of the crazy roofers that think they can get a brand new roof regardless of the condition of the roof. But that's what I always recommend, is to have a roofer go out and actually look at the roof.
Thank you, Barney.
All right, you're welcome. All right, so let's talk a little bit about text message dangers. So I had a situation where my son and I were texting during a football game, and the quarterback had just thrown his third interception, and it was returned for a touchdown. And I text my son, "This is a bunch of BS." And what I didn't realize is in came a text message, this is Sunday, from the wife of a professional hockey player, Dallas Stars hockey player, that said, "Hey, Barney, I can't meet with you tomorrow." And I respond, "This is a bunch of BS." So still a good client of ours, and we laugh about it, but, you know, mistakes happen, so be careful. All right, I'm going to talk about a situation called the Greenbelt, and this is one of my favorite claim scenarios. This is actually the Greenbelt house, nice little house in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, anybody here consider Fort Worth out in the country? No, right? The home overlooks this beautiful Greenbelt, right? Very, very green over here, and it was a very, very nice Greenbelt. You see a little green over here. Here's part of the problem, though. Up here in the corner, you can see some construction equipment, and you can see some dirt up here. So guess what's happening to this beautiful Greenbelt? It's going to become another community. And so now this client that bought that house is ticked that that's going away. Now, all of you, you're experts in the real estate industry, so you know whatever Greenbelt is out there, what's going to happen, right? And the answer is, of course not. You go up into Salina, into Prosper, what's a Greenbelt today could be a Target tomorrow. We just don't know what's going to happen. So here's the actual wording that came from the lawyer that wrote up the demand letter. Purchase was intended to be purchase of their dream home, blah, 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 blah. Home was to be the escape from their busy city lives and desire for wide open spaces. Remember what I told you, this is Fort Worth we're talking about, right? Defendants knew better than the plaintiffs because they operate in the real estate industry. The long and short of this is it took $13,500 to make it go away in attorney fees. The other party got nothing. I have a hard time believing that the realtor didn't see this buyer as being kind of a mini lunatic and been able to pick up on the issues and the insistence of that buyer to have that Greenbelt. I would have sent them to the Department of Economic Development to see whether or not there are any plans for that Greenbelt if they're so insistent. Here's a claim that came in that talks about lakefront property. And what happened is they underestimated the footage from here to here. Seller states they think it's 150 feet. A few weeks after the sale, the buyers measure it's close to 100. The listing agent, where they went wrong, is they suggested a survey, but guess what? Nothing was signed. This is where we get into that issue of documentation. So you did everything you were supposed to. You made the recommendation, but you had no proof. The seller's agent misrepresented, and the case was settled between the two parties for $30,000 plus legal fees. The whole takeaway here is if you recommend something, document the fact that you recommended it. All right. Ashley, are you here?
Hello, yes I am.
Okay, so I have a few slides about Seller Shield, and what Bob and I decided to do is rather than go through Seller Shield ourselves, is Ashley is actually a representative from Seller Shield, and we felt like she could represent the product better than we could.
Great, well, I'm so thankful to be here. I really appreciate you guys having us today. And I'm just going to briefly go over what Seller Shield is, how we're there to benefit you guys and your sellers. And then if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to ask me, okay? So to get started, what Seller's Shield is. So the reason why Seller's Shield is founded is because, as you guys know, mistakes on the disclosure are the #1 cause of home sale lawsuits. And unfortunately, if the seller gets sued, then typically so does the agent, and then so does the brokerage. So Seller's Shield was founded to help solve this problem. Now, the way that we do that can best be summed up in one sentence. Seller's Shield prevents legal issues for sellers, agents, and brokers, and protects sellers if there is a claim. So as you can see in this slide right here, we do have our 2 products. We have our preventative product, which is known as our Smart Seller Tools, and then we also have our protection product, which is our optional home sale legal protection. Now, since we've partnered with your brokerage, all listing clients of yours now gain free and exclusive access to the preventative tools, which are known as our Smart Seller Tools. And again, this is at absolutely no cost to the agent or to the home seller. Now, the Smart Seller Tools benefit your clients by providing them with legal tips and interactive guidance as they fill out their disclosure form. This is going to help to prevent lawsuits from happening, and it also helps to limit agent liability. Now, next we have our protection product, our home sale legal protection, which is available as a client gift from the agent or for the home seller to consider, but it is not mandatory to purchase in order to fill out the disclosure using the tools. Now, it is something that's important to note and discuss with your sellers, because while agents, brokers, and title, you guys all have your E&O insurance, the home seller is the only one left unprotected if there is a claim made. So the home sale legal protection would provide your sellers with up to $20,000 of paid legal representation in the event of a home sale claim. And this would be valid for up to 1, 2, or 3 years. So if your seller gets sued on any part of the sale, not just the disclosure notice, Seller's Shield will hire an attorney to represent them. So this just provides your home sellers with some peace of mind, knowing that if the buyer does come after them with a legitimate or even a frivolous lawsuit, Seller's Shield has a paid legal real estate attorney waiting to protect them. And that, in a nutshell, is basically what we do for you guys. We do offer the TREC Seller's Disclosure Notice as well as the TXR Seller's Disclosure Notice. And then based on the answers to their questions, and especially in that TXR form, we're going to add other addendum on. So if they say answer yes to was the property built before 1978, then that lead-based paint addendum is automatically going to be added in for them to fill out. If they answer no, that doesn't need to be added in, so it won't be in there for them. Just to make the whole process a lot easier. We also have embedded definitions of things. I'm sure you guys get calls all the time. What's a sump pump? What's a French drain? What's this? What's that? We have that all embedded in there for them so that they can just click a little link that says exactly what everything is. That way they don't have to call you to ask those questions. And then also, I'm sure you guys get back forms all the time that are incomplete. People skipped questions. It's illegible. You can't read it. Missing an initial. You're never going to have that happen with Seller's Shield. We actually do not allow them to move on past a section if they have not answered every question in that section. We also, at the end, have them, once they sign, it's all done electronically, and it will sign every page and initial every page that needs to have that signature there. So you're never going to get back those incomplete forms. Now, guys, it's super easy for you to log into your accounts. All you guys would need to do is go to sellershield.com. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see login, and then you'll just click on agent login. From there, it'll just ask you to put in your state, your agent license ID, and if you've never logged in before, it's going to ask you to create a password. If you already have logged in, it's just going to ask you to put that password in there, and it'll take you straight into your dashboard where you can send your clients their forms. Now, I know I just threw a lot at you guys. Do you have any questions for me?
So we will make Ashley's information available. She'll email it to Bob and I, and then Bob will go and disperse it out. So if you have any questions, you can certainly follow up with her. You know, the big thing is to take all of you out of the business of assisting your sellers in completing the seller's disclosure. That's exactly what this product does. You can give them the 800 number for Seller's Shield, and Seller's Shield will actually assist with the completion of the seller's disclosure.
Barney, can you give us an idea of the cost of that? That's a good idea for a client gift.
Ashley, are you still there? Because it varies on cost between the 1, 2, and 3 year.
Yes, yes, it does. So the way that it works is we actually have a couple different ways you can pay, and then each protection package based on the year is going to be a different fee. So for example, that 1 year protection package would be $199 if you choose to pay up front. We give you a bit of a discount there. Or if you'd like to pay at closing through title, then it would be $299. And then the 2 year is going to be $249 or $349, and the 3 year is $299 or $399. So that's your breakdown there. And you'll be able to see that when you go to send your sellers their forms. It's going to ask you for the property and then the primary seller information. And then on the next page, it offers you one of those protection plans if you'd like. So it'll have that price breakdown for you, and then you can choose to pay now or later. Or you can say, you know what, no protection package right now. I'm just going to send the invite only. So you have all of those options there for you.
So let me, if I may add to this, and thank you, Ashley, for being here. We do have a partnership with them. They do have our agent roster. They have the names, and of course, as was mentioned in the email, that needs to be updated. You need to have this seller shield information in your listing packet. You need to offer that up to every seller. In fact, I recall, help me with this, Ashley, there's a form that we provide to the seller to make a decision whether or not to do it or not. And we at least need to have that form in the file. If they say, you know, thanks for the information, but we're not going to do it, we'll need to have that form, that documentation that they were offered. So a year later, when the seller gets sued, and then they discover after the fact, wow, man, if I'd had that coverage, then I could have some help with here. We don't want them coming after us. We say, you know what, this was offered. You had it offered to you, but you chose not to. So we need to have that in every listing package and offer this up to every seller. There are some limitations, as I recall, on if it's a flip property or things of that nature. Is that what I recall, Ashley?
Yes, Bob, that's correct. So if it's going to be a flip or a rental or a commercial, those are things that the home sale legal protection packages are not available for. So it would be just a straight home sale with the seller selling their home. Okay, excellent. So it really is a very good service. I would encourage you to do it. I encourage you to provide it to every seller and at least let the seller make the decision on what to do, because it really is, it's a great product. So we appreciate you doing it. Any questions from anybody?
Bob, how does this work through command? Do we just upload the document once it's completed, or?
That's a great technical question that I would presume that maybe Lori or Eddie would be able to help us with, because I can almost spell command, but that's about it. I don't know. I can let you guys know that when the documents are completed and signed, you do get a copy you'll get an email that has a link to access those forms, and you can download them to a PDF, and you can also print them. And I have heard that those PDFs are pretty simple to upload into command or .loop. Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so there was a question on chat that I'd like to address from Angela. I have a seller that believes an apartment complex is about to be built on the side of the cul-de-sac, wants to sell. Do we need to disclose that? Is it sufficient for the listing agent to say buyer and buyer's agent to verify?
Those are two different questions.
What's that?
Those were two different questions. Sorry, it doesn't put a block. I sent the first question, and then, can you ask her to stop back to me? I sent the first question, and then you asked another question, and my response was, is it sufficient for the listing agent to say buyer?
All right, so let's
on the measurements where the square footage was off of the lakefront. But my first one, my biggest question was on the apartment. So
yeah, sorry. So the very, very first or second slide, I talked about when in doubt, disclose. Because here's how this could potentially play out. Let's say you don't say anything, and the seller gets sued by the buyer. What's the seller going to say? Well, I told my real estate agent the apartment complex was being built. Now all of a sudden we're roped into the case.
Isn't that part of the buyer's due diligence, though, to check those things?
It's part of the due diligence, but remember what I said, 50% of the claims result in no payout to the other party. And it could be $10,000 to $12,000 of legal fees to go and get out of this particular claim. So Again, this isn't the class on getting liked in customer service. It's about avoid going to court. So my recommendation is to disclose.
Okay, so let me add to that, and I agree with that basic position. You need to talk to the seller. There's really no place on the seller's disclosure notice to address this, because the seller's disclosure notice is based on information about the condition of the property, not things going on around outside of it. But if you flip the thought to it and say, if you had the buyer, would you like for your buyer to know that? And while it is a responsibility of the buyer's agent to check things out and to see what's going on for the benefit of the buyer, they've got a fiduciary duty there in their disclosure. We don't want to have the risk later. So visit with your seller and say, okay, you've told me you think this is happening. I think this is good information that the buyers ought to have. And if you give that information to a buyer, and you can do it in something as simple as an email or whatever, make sure you have the authority from the seller to disclose that, because if something happens that kills the seller's sale, and the seller later gets good legal advice that he didn't have to disclose that, really didn't have anything to do with the condition of the property, then the seller could come after us. So we need to have that conversation. We need to say how big a deal is. If it's something that the seller says, well, you know, I don't know that for a fact. I've heard, like some of my neighbors said, that's why they're selling because of this, but nothing with the city, nothing with the county, no development, no permits been pulled. You just have rumors of, you know, that's a little dicey situation. So I think you have the conversation. It's not an automatic disclosure that you make, but there's a risk there, and we need to look at the risk and decide the degree to which we're willing to take the risk and the degree to which our client says they're willing to take it. Because, you know, Barney's right. If later the buyer sues the seller, they're going to sue the agent. And if the seller says, well, I told my agent, so I presume my agent told you, I trusted my agent, then it may end up being that not only the buyer sues us and sues the seller may end up suing us. So it's better to just have that conversation, determine the level of risk. And frankly, when you really have that happen in a specific scenario, that's a good phone call to Christy or myself, and let's have the conversation.
All right, let's talk about, you feel like we need to go over these TREC changes from 2 years ago, Bob?
No, we don't, because we've got a whole new host of changes. TREC in their August meeting looked again at a revised list of changes from the Burglary Committee. They had looked at changes in their May meeting, put it in the Texas Registry, got a lot of comments about it. So in the August TREC meeting, quarterly meeting, they accepted the new changes to the point they're putting it in the Texas Register. And then at TREC's November meeting, they'll see what kind of comments they have, and chances are they'll go ahead and approve the changes that have been proposed. The biggest single change, and there's some changes in there dealing with moving some information in paragraphs around, dealing with some lease disclosures, but the big single change is a proposal, and they're moving the termination and the option period and everything in option fee in paragraph 23. They're moving it to paragraph 5, which is earnest money paragraph. And they will say that the buyer delivers the option fee and the earnest money to the escrow agent. And there are a lot of different layers of what's going on here. And it can be in one check or two checks, and it's responsibility of the title company to then get that to the seller. But a lot of comments on this, a lot of situations, and a lot of complications. The majority of the comments that were made from the May changes favored this. I think there's some interesting challenges about how all that works, but that almost certainly will be approved in their November meeting. So we will certainly have a training class on dealing with those changes if they finally are approved in November, because the concept is if TREC approves them in November, then they'll have them available for voluntary use or mandatory use for the next couple of months. And then probably then in January, they'll become mandatory. So we'll certainly do some training on that, but several really big changes there that we'll have some conversations on.
All right, we're going to start flying through because we're starting to get against time. We still got a bunch to finish through.
Okay.
All right, so photos. We had a claim scenario listing agent was given a flash drive with photos of the house by the seller. The photos were taken by a photographer to make the photos fit MLS. They cropped the copyright out of the photo. When the photos were turned over, the realtor did not identify the origin. So the agent altered the work, removed the copyright, and used the photos for a purpose that the photos weren't originally purchased. Gosh, Bob, I hope you didn't fall into the ocean. Let's talk about photos do nots. Do not accept photos without identifying the source. Use photos when copying an MLS listing. Modify photos without permission. Use photos stored online websites from years ago. And we've actually had 2 claim scenarios where that's happened, where I think it was Zillow. I don't know if it was Zillow in both cases, but Zillow on one realized the realtor had stolen the photos off their website. And do not resell your photos unless you have ownership. So if somebody else takes over one of your listings and calls up and says, will you sell the photos, you really don't have right to sell those photos because you don't own them, even if you paid for them. You need to get clearance from the photographer releasing ownership of the photos to you if you think you're going to end up having to resell them. All right, when it comes to mortgage pre-qualification, especially now with furloughs and stuff like that, those people that are going to online brokerage firms that aren't getting an actual pre-approval but a pre-qualification, you want to make sure in the third-party finance addendum agreement that down here, you increase the number of days for approval of financing. When it comes to buyer do nots, do not allow your buyers to change jobs, open a business, purchase a new car, or open new credit. That refrigerator at Nebraska Furniture Mart will be on sale after they move into their house. All these things can blow up their loan or just cause delays in the closing. All right, now we're going to spend a little bit of time on computer hacking. This stuff is real. We had a claim last year as large as $275,000 within the KW system. So don't think that you're this won't happen.
But not us.
Not you.
Not us.
In this particular case, a password was discovered on a Gmail account. The password was changed. The hacker read through an email looking for cash buyers and sent the cash buyer fictitious wiring instructions. So let's talk about how this happens. The first is on a phishing email. So typically these emails come from somebody you know, somebody who has sent you an email before. I don't know about all of you, but I keep getting videos on Facebook Instant Messenger. And if you ever want your Facebook to get hacked, just open one of those. The email won't look odd. You know, imagine getting an email that says, click here for your real estate referral. That's going to be something that probably is of interest to you. Now, one of the things you can do is hover your mouse over the link. And look what that link says. 69.89. That doesn't sound like a legitimate person, does it? So I did not click on that link, but I just put the mouse next to that link. You can also look for spelling errors. Look how similar the two Comerica's look. All I did was swap an I with an exclamation point. Here's an example of another email. Click here to clean up your mailbox. Again, a fictitious email. Here's another one, Office 365, which I use. Verify your account. Again, fictitious email. So what I recommend to people is, again, do not click, but hover the mouse over it. It'll give you an idea of who they come from. Do not hit reply and say, hey, did you mean to send me this email? Because guess what? If somebody is inside that email, they're going to hit reply and say, yes, I did mean to send it to you, right? So let's talk ways that this can impact you. Anybody have earnest money checks on their hard drive or lease agreements or credit reports or anything of that nature? You have information on there. I'm going to talk to you in a minute about what the ransom virus looks like. Locking down your computer, hacking into your email. And by the way, if you get any wiring instructions from a title company, do not forward those to your buyer or seller. Right? If the title company is asking you for wiring instructions, You tell the title company to handle that directly with the buyer and get out of the middle of the wiring business. The reason why is that title company may have been hacked into, right? So the title company gets hacked into, they hit the forward or send it to you, you hit the forward button, guess what? Now both of you are in on that claim. So stay out of the middle on any kind of wiring instructions. Here's an example of what happens with the ransom virus. So this is a Word document after somebody has the word ransom virus. You can't read any of your PDFs, your Word docs, or your Excel documents because somebody has encrypted all of your documents. And the only way you can get it converted back is if you pay a ransom. That's why it's called the ransom virus. So an eye doctor client of mine recently got this on his system. His stuff wasn't backed up. He lost a year's worth of data. Or he could have paid $100,000. So for those of you that think your laptop's safe by password protection, all you got to do is type into Google, hack into a computer, and it gives you pretty easy instructions. Email hacking. There's password guessing programs that can cycle through billions of password combinations per second. In 5.5 hours, have guessed every combination. For those of you that, has anybody here ever used LastPass? So LastPass is a great app and means of storing all of your passwords with a single password. And the thing that's kind of neat about it is if you leave your, let's say you leave your laptop at Starbucks and you get back to the office and you're like, oh my gosh, my laptop is at Starbucks. You could log into one of the computers from your office, log into LastPass, authenticate it, so it's going to send you a text message to your cell phone and shut down all of your stored passwords on your computer. The nice thing is also with LastPass is you only have to remember a single password and the authentication password beyond that. So the key is that two-step verification. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And LastPass is 100% free. So for those of you that are on Gmail, if you haven't paid attention to much of what Bob and I have said, even though we both find it to be extremely fascinating, pay attention to this. Google,
Oh, yeah.
Google, Hotmail, Yahoo, and even Facebook have an option of security called two-step verification, and it is not automatic. So what that means is if somebody does get your email, knows your Gmail and knows your password, they're still not getting in until they have the 6-digit code that now gets sent to your cell phone. So again, it's called two-step verification or two-step authentication. Very, very important to get that security set up under your email account as well as your Facebook. Because all of us get messages. I saw one last week, don't accept that request, I was hacked. Any questions so far? Let's talk about public Wi-Fi. I love asking this question in the live class. Where's the worst place to use public Wi-Fi? And people always jump up and say Starbucks. And I correct them and I say the airport, except under a pandemic, because there's probably more people at Starbucks than there is at the airport. But typically the airport and a hotel are the two worst places to use public Wi-Fi because there's so many people on it and so much potential of getting hacked. And what they do is they monitor where you're going and your IDs and passwords that you're logging into, get into various sites. Because I don't know about most of you, but I like to use the same passwords and the same email addresses or IDs. Just so I don't have to remember a zillion of them. So the best thing to do is to stay off public Wi-Fi. And what I'll typically do is use my phone for a hotspot. And right here, this for an iPhone, you would select personal hotspot. It's going to pop up a password, which you can go and change. And then whenever you go to connect to the internet from your computer, you can use this as your means of connecting to the internet instead of using the public Wi-Fi. So let's summarize. Preventative methods. Do not click on the links. Remember, I showed you hovering the mouse over it. You may want to advise any cash buyers that you'll never provide wiring instructions. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to cash buyers. Add a signature at the bottom of your email. Add password complexity with cell phone verification that we talked about, the two-step verification, and try to stay off public Wi-Fi. Any questions on cyber?
So Barney, let me ask you, as you know, we have cyber insurance through you. Is there anything you want to say to the agents about the cyber insurance and the value of that and what it does for us as we're talking about the whole cyber issue?
Yeah, I mean, the most common question I get asked is there coverage if I use an email other than KW email? And the question is going to come down to, how did you get hacked into? And is the hack business related or is it personal related? But yes, we've gone, and almost all the major real estate offices have elected to go with cyber insurance coverage just to provide an extra layer of protection. So it looks like we have a bunch of...
We do have some interesting comments and questions here.
So the big question comes down to VPNs. Yeah, VPNs add an extra source of security. So when you have a VPN, you log into it. I'm seeing if, see, we have one right here. Can everybody see where it says VPN on my screen? Or no, just the, never mind. So what the VPN does is it makes you log in again to connect to your email server. So again, another good use of additional protection. But I really like the two-step authentication. Probably the best computer backup, you know, yes, you can go to iCloud and you can go to Dropbox and items of that nature. But Mosaic and Carbonite, what I like is it doesn't involve any manual movement of files, nor does iCloud. But for $6 a month, it will actually back up 90 days worth of data. So if you get that ransom virus, you can just download your documents from 3 days ago and have your non-encrypted documents in front of you. $6 a month seems like kind of a no-brainer to have a full backup of your computer. All right, skipping topics here. CNA offers the ability to reduce your deductible $5,000 if you have those 4 items in file. And again, it's not just TREC approved, it can be Texas Realtor approved forms. So home inspection, home warranty, seller's disclosure, and state approved forms. The reason why the company is willing to take $5,000 off of your deductible is because if you have those 4 items in file, the chances of them having a claim just got significantly reduced. And again, these were similar to the items that are required if you're selling your own property. All right, jumping to tenant selection. The big thing you're trying to do here is to avoid any sort of discrimination. So here's a sample tenant selection form, and I'm sure you have one in your office. And typically what the tenant selection form will do is outline requirements. Names and numbers of prior landlords, monthly income requirements, deposits, and when they'll be required, that you're gonna run credit and criminal reports, that it may exclude pets or certain breeds. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in a minute. For those of you that are thinking about getting into property management, there's 12 reasons not to. And I'm not gonna go read through those, but those will be available on the PowerPoint, which will be sent to Bob. There's some of the bad dogs that insurance companies don't like. The Pit Bull, the Rottweiler, the Doberman, the Chow, and that guy is actually a dog I rescued that I finally got DNA tested, and he is part of those dogs, but I'm not telling you which one because I won't be able to get home insurance any longer. All right, everyone's favorite topic comes down to emotional support animals. So let's say I show up with one of these dogs and I'm wanting to rent a house, and you turn around and say, well, no dogs allowed. And I said, but wait a second, Bob, I can't fall asleep unless Sam is right by my side and he's my emotional support animal. What do you do? Well, if somebody pulls the emotional support animal card on you, you have to treat that animal like they're bringing another screwdriver or TV set into the house. You can't charge an extra deposit. You can't charge additional rent. It's just like they're bringing another piece of clothing or something like that into the house. There is a difference between service dogs and emotional support animals, but the rules are not all that much different. You can, as of today's date, ask them for a copy of the certificate, but you can't ask them why they, why they have an emotional support animal. Any questions on this? Normally chat starts blowing up because everybody likes talking about emotional support animals. All right, moving along. Oh, and the big thing here, be aware of professionals looking at you to decline or deny somebody a property when they play the emotional support card. All right, we're wrapping up. Insurance agents have access to something called clue reports. Clue reports give you a 7-year claim history. That 7 years will tell you the type of claim, the dollar amount, and the date that the claim happened. It's good for negotiation with lenders. We have situations where buyers think that sellers got claim money and didn't end up getting the home fixed. So that's really, really valuable information. Insurance agents can run those for you. We do it at no charge. If you do not have a relationship with somebody, all you need to do is text me or email me the address. When it comes down to flood zones, the most important thing there is that second item, and that is the elevation report, which is typically done by a survey company. And that tells you how high up that house is in relationship to the flood zone. That can make a 90% difference on rate. If a house is extremely elevated, it may only be $200 to $300 a year for flood insurance. If the house is right level with the water, it's probably going to be $2,000 to $3,000 a year. That elevation certificate typically takes a couple of weeks. So if you're dealing with a flood zone, don't wait till the last minute for that. So some of the things that make a home uninsurable, the big one is the top one, age of roof. Anything over 15 years old is probably going to be on an actual cash value basis, which means the buyer is basically self-insuring the roof if it's over 15 years old. Companies don't like unfenced pools. The fence doesn't have to be around the pool itself, but just around the backyard. Some don't like slides and diving boards. Prior claims can be problematic, especially water claims. Roofing claims actually benefit the house and not a detriment. And I'm going to give you all a little tip for your personal home insurance. If you've gone and replaced your roof, you need to call up your insurance agent and tell them, even though they reported the initial claim for you. And let me tell you why. Yesterday, I had a client was upset about his renewal premium with Travelers. It was $4,500. He said, well, I just got a new roof. Well, we actually endorsed the policy to say his roof was only a month old instead of 10 years old. His premium went down $900. So if you have a new roof, make sure you tell your insurance agent, even though that's the company that just paid for your new roof, because the claims and the underwriting sides don't normally talk to each other when it comes down to that. All right, this is a biggie. When it comes down to leasebacks, when there's a leaseback, if the house were to burn down during a leaseback, whose policy is going to step up and pay for the leaseback? The answer is potentially neither one, and let me explain to you why. The homeowner policy states we will insure a home you reside. Well, guess what? During a leaseback, They're not residing in the house. So technically you need a landlord or dwelling fire policy, which is used for somebody renting a house. The problem is most insurance companies aren't going to want to write a policy for a few days. So typically the insurance company will say, yeah, no problem. We'll note the file. There's a 3-day lease back. The takeaway from this is you want to make sure that your buyer clears it with their insurance company if they're doing a lease back. Any questions on this? Vacant homes. Homes are considered vacant after 30 or 60 days. Again, don't try to define what's considered vacant because it's not completely clear. But if the seller has moved out of a house, you may just want to say, check with your insurance agent and make sure that it's properly insured. Foundations. This is one of my favorite because a lot of insurance companies have coverage for foundation. But in order for the foundation coverage to exist, there has to be a leak under the foundation. And the leak had to have caused the shifting in the foundation, not the shifting in the foundation caused the leak. So you run into a little bit of a chicken and an egg scenario with this. But what you don't want to do is for the foundation company to go in there, put in the piers, do the post-leak test, which they all do, and say, hey guys, no wonder why your foundation shifted. You had a leak under the slab. Now you want to go and report the claim to the insurance company. The insurance company is going to deny the claim because the claim has to be reported before the foundation work is done so that they can go and do a full inspection. All right, that's a little bit of what we do on the personal side of the house. So this is a program that pulls up quotes from all those different companies. And that's what most insurance brokers will do, and the advantage of using a broker. All right, wrapping up, tips to avoid lawsuits. Maintain good communication. Be liked. Bob and I have done nothing to help you be liked today, right, Bob?
Oh, I don't know. Just tolerating you and I for the lengthy period of time builds character. Everybody here must have more character.
There you go. Avoid giving false expectations. Have the client make really all decisions. Document your advice. If you file a commission dispute, expect a countersuit. It almost always happens. Avoid the difficult and unethical client. Put your client's interests first. And to wrap up, we talked about agent-owned properties, the items that you need to have in the file, the state-approved forms, the seller's disclosure, home inspection, home warranty. Avoiding the crazy client. Remember the Greenbelt scenario. And by the way, those same clients that are insistent on the Greenbelt may be insistent on an elementary school. And when you get into these high growth areas, elementary schools are being redistricted all the time. So if they're insistent on a certain elementary school, I would document to them, hey, you may want to check with Frisco ISD and make sure that, you know, it's going to continue to feed into XYZ elementary. We talked about dual agency transactions and the need to disclose what your relationship is in all parties. We talked about cyber and email security, about clicking on links, staying off public Wi-Fi, using the two-step authentication. And we talked about the need for the tenant selection form and emotional support animals. That's all I've got. We'll open it up for questions. I'm looking through the chat. Somebody asked, do we need to disclose an animal when you bring it in? Well, you're kind of in violation of your lease. Yes, you should disclose that you have an emotional support animal. I have an investor client that built a new home and wants to host his own open houses every day of the week, and even mentioned the possibility of hiring someone else to do it for them. It seems like it'd be a huge liability for both of us. What are the implications? I don't like it because that the seller of the home isn't going to know what precautions to take when going to do it. I don't think your insurance is really at risk or your own liability at risk, as long as you turn around and say, no, I wouldn't recommend you doing that.
And one thing we need to add to that particular point, I presume this is a property that we have listed for that investor client. In Texas, you're required, if you hold an open house, even if you're doing it for the seller, you're required to have a real estate license. And so whether or not a seller will be able to treat this person as an employee, separate from the relationship they have under the general agency relationship with the special agency relationship with their client, is another question. I think it is risky, and I think it does create some coverage challenges, but we understand how very aggressive many of our investor clients get in holding up houses going through that. But when they start hiring somebody, as a minimum, you have to, in writing, tell your client they need to seek legal advice before doing this.
So Assad asked the question, what if the emotional support animal is not covered by home insurance? And that's a great question, because I was at an insurance company meeting about, I don't know, probably a year and a half ago. And so the CEO was talking to a group of about 50 agents or so. And so I asked the question, I said, what are you going to do if I have a client with a pit bull and they say it's the emotional support animal? He said, well, legally, we would have to take it. And then I see a bunch of the underwriters turn around and going like this in the back of the room. So the insurance companies, in my opinion, would be forced to take that animal. But they're behind the times. So I still don't think, Assad, that you can deny that property to that person. You've got to stick to your real estate lane. I think the insurance companies are going to be forced to take it.
Remember also, in that type of situation, if the acceptance of a service dog or an animal that's a dangerous breed, if that creates some hardship for the landlord, for the owner, in the way of premium and so forth, he's not required to take on that tenant and that service dog that's a pit bull if it creates a hardship. He needs to be prepared to prove up that it creates hardship. But if his insurance company says, no, not going to cover you, and he can't get anyone else of the same quality and rates for doing this, you can't require that landlord to do it. But he needs to be prepared in case of a complaint to prove up that this was an undue hardship.
So the insurance companies don't have anything in their policy where they can surcharge for any kind of dogs. So it's not a matter of them paying, but the insurance company may put a dog exclusion on the policy, but I still think legally they have to abide by the general rules that we all have to. Okay, another question. Are we allowed to have an LLC as a KW Realtor? Are there any particular restrictions or requirements? And I'll answer what I know, or unless, Bob, you want to answer.
Yeah, when we talk about an agent having an LLC, you can have an LLC. We cannot pay a commission to that LLC until that LLC has been registered with TREC as an entity broker. And we have to have our broker be the individual broker behind it. And then we use that form that Barney talked about earlier where we get E&O coverage. But you cannot advertise in any of your advertising, use any corporate names, LLC, president. Those are TREC violations. Those are TREC rules. So if you're going to do an LLC, you need to contact us and we need to see why you want an LLC. If you want it for liability reasons or have commissions paid, then there are certain processes that will be come into play that you'll have to deal with. So you need to call us.
What is your experience with tile or rubber roofs from Jeannie? You know, as long as they're hail resistant, they shouldn't be any problem. So there's clay tile, which is bad, versus concrete tile, which is good. So the concrete is hail resistant. The rubber is supposed to be extremely hail resistant. So typically when somebody gets a roof that's hail resistant, they'll get a certificate from the roofer that also needs to be filed with the Department of Insurance to get an extra discount.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
So we have one from Megan O. That tenant moved in, had no pets, and then later we learned there is a pet. It's a pit bull, and they determined it is emotional support. This is dealt with much the same as the earlier Because if there wasn't a pet at the beginning, I would think, then there was no pet fee. But at this point in time, if the landlord allows that tenant to continue in this situation, if they accept it really is an emotional support or a service dog, can't charge a pet fee, can't do like that, because a service dog is technically not a pet. That's just, that other thing. So if it happens after the fact, landlord's going to frankly have, in my opinion, deal with it the same way as they would have up front. Is that right, Barney?
100%. No additional deposits, no additional payments. It's like carrying a screwdriver or TV set into the house. Becky asked, who gives a certificate that an emotional support animal is necessary? You can go online and get one, and I think it requires a therapist talking to you for about 45 seconds, or however long they determine that you need emotional support. And next thing you know, for $100 or $80 and a few minutes of your time, you've got an emotional support animal. So, frankly, I'm the emotional support human for my dog. So he's trying to get a certificate showing that I need to be with him all the time. But, people are taking way too much advantage of it.
Yeah, it is abused. Great.
But I have a quick question. When you have a client that has a service animal and you're looking for a lease tenant, when do you disclose that they have a service animal? Because if you disclose that up front, a lot of times they're being turned down because unless they already allow pets.
Well, they can't be turned down. So, but I understand what you're talking about. Strategically, now you're asking a strategic decision versus a risk management decision. I would say strategically, you probably want to wait towards the end, because legally they can't, especially a service animal, because service animal is one that's medically necessary, that can detect seizures, that's for people with severe PTSD, for blindness, for things of that nature.
Good answer. We're good.
I think there's one more question that. Yes, service and emotional support animals are completely different. As I mentioned, the service animals are for a true medical reason, whereas emotional support is for an emotional reason. Great job. Good questions that we had from people. It's been very, very good. We have really good attendance. You'll send me the PowerPoint for anybody who wants it. They'll be able to get it and have that good information. I did send out this morning the 2 forms to everyone. One that, a letter of understanding that you're an independent contractor, the other dealing with our PMP. And I would really appreciate you going ahead and signing off on that. And we've decided in the office that our MCA will keep that in the file. So you can send that to Angie, our MCA. And this is something that we're going to be much more diligent. If we can just convince our risk manager to be more diligent about it. Wait a minute, that's me. Okay. And do this thing each year, because that's really what we need to be doing, is we need that update, because things happen, things change. And I greatly appreciate Barney putting this together. I appreciate the service he provides our office and the other KW offices in the area, because, these are minefields. And I think the big concept that I talk about a lot, that I want you to, as one of our agents, to understand, we've got your back. We don't want you to worry about this. We want you to do the good business, pay attention to these concepts, but don't spend your time being afraid and worrying about all the things that could happen, because that's why we're there for you. That's why we have the E&O. That's why I do the risk management. That's why we have the training, so you can focus on your clients and your business, and especially focus on being likable. And so, that's just, it's a big thing. So we need to work through that. So I really hope that this will help you in all those lines and work through that. And please know that we're there for you, just like the agent hotline. We're one of the few offices that have that there, so you can call for all those great questions. But I really thank everyone for being here. We really had a great turnout.
And I see Mike and Christy are both here, and thank you very much for that. Any last minute questions for me before we let Barney go and move on? Anything? I'm good. Barney, you have anything else you need to add? If not,
Good. Thank you, guys. It's my pleasure.